Okay, in this video, I'm not gonna waste your time. We're gonna be talking about f1.4 lenses. A lot of people aspire to own f1.4 lenses. They're kind of more expensive and a lot of people really want them. Me, I do have a couple of f1.4 lenses. I'm actually recording with a 35mm f1.4 and it's looking kind of nice, right? Well, it's not all good, it's not all perfect. And in fact, I would suggest that most people just ignore f1.4 lenses. So let's get into it. Hey, welcome back to the channel. My name is Tom. So in this video, we're going to be talking about f1.4 lenses, the upside, the downside, and ultimately why I think that most people are sort of blindsided by the upside of f1.4. So what does f1.4 mean? For those of you who don't know, I'm sure it's not a lot of you, but let's just get into it. So it's basically a very fast lens. It takes in a lot of light, which means that it gives some interesting benefits. For example, you get this really nice background blur. Like you see behind me, it's kind of blurry, kind of looks cinematic. And there are other upsides as well, but also downsides. But the thing that I wanted to highlight here is that despite of all the upsides of having an f1.4 lens, it's mostly a bad choice in camera lenses. So I'm gonna explain to you why. So let's talk about the upside. So as I mentioned before, you take a lot of light into the lens and you get some interesting benefits like this nice background blur, which I just mentioned. The thing about background blur is if you look at movies, I'm talking like big production Hollywood movies, and you take any frame in a movie and you sort of look at it with your camera geek eyes, you will notice something very interesting. It's not f1.4. It's not even close to it. Honestly, to my camera geek eyes, it looks like f2.8. The equivalence, like whatever kind of frames they use on those expensive cameras, to my eyes, it looks like f2.8. And they get away with it. But why? If they have the money to be recording something at f1.4 or maybe even faster than that, why would they settle for f2.8? Well, there's a lot of good reasons for this, and I'll discuss it in a moment. But I would also like to mention that sometimes you have certain close-up shots where it looks like there's more background blur. Well, obviously, like you can use a zoom lens and then you'll get background blur. And when you do a close-up shot, you don't even need it to be at f1.4 or f1.8 or anything like that. The second benefit, and I think that this is pretty much the only one that I really care about when it comes to f1.4 lenses, is because it takes in a lot of light, it has a very nice low light performance, especially on a Sony full-frame camera. It can really make a difference if you're shooting at night, like doing astrophotography and stuff like that, which I do on occasion. But for most of my work, that low light performance is not needed. Like if you're shooting outside or if you have a nice studio like I do with studio lamps and stuff like that, you don't need f1.4. I'm just recording in f1.4 to show off, basically. Now let's talk about some of the downsides, and there's gonna be a couple here. So first of all, I've noticed that when you're shooting at f1.4, the focus capacity, if you can call it that, it's a very small and narrow, meaning that let's say this camera right now is focusing on my eyes, it could actually mean that a part of my nose is a bit blurry. So if you want to capture someone in entirety to be in focus, you will most likely fail at f1.4. And there I would recommend something like f1.8, f2.0, something like that. But f1.4, it's like a recipe for disaster if you're trying to focus in on something. And also, if you're sort of moving back and forth, the blurry background can sort of wobble and it's not very desirable when you're watching a video. And I've had that problem many times when I'm shooting at f1.4, and it has nothing to do with the focusing capabilities of the lens itself. Well, sometimes it can, but it's mostly because, again, it's such a narrow focus point that it's very difficult to maintain it and not jumping all over the place. So for that purpose, like, I would not recommend people to be recording in f1.4. I think that people who do these sort of vlogs at f1.4, they're just bragging, you know, they're just sort of showing like, look at my fancy background blur, guess what lens I have, you know, and you kind of go like, yeah, okay, I see, you have an f1.4 lens, but I don't think you need that. Like, you do not need that. Like, at first, when I was playing around with f1.4 lenses, I was actually impressed, and I was like, I love these lenses. F1.4 is the way to go, but that's when I started to sort of discover the downsides of it. Another huge downside to an f1.4 lens is the size of it. So this is just to show you an example. This is a very unfair comparison, but this is actually an f1.8 lens, and this is a zoom lens, but this is basically what the equivalence of an f1.4 lens would look like. So I'm just using this as a comparison. This is f1.4, just pretend in your head that this is an f1.4 lens. This is the size difference. So it's heavier, it's bigger, it's thicker, it's way more expensive. It's way more expensive, and people are sort of blindsided by that also. I think sometimes when you see a hefty price tag on a lens, you kind of go, well, it must be like really, really good. I don't think it's worth it, to be completely honest. And even if these were priced exactly the same, look at the size difference. What would you rather have in your backpack, this or this? Like, this is chunky, this is heavy, makes my bicep have to work for it, you know what I'm saying? Whereas an f1.8 lens, it's a nifty lens, you know, it's like a nifty 50 lens. And so, no, I think f1.8 is the golden standard of any camera system. And I would even go too far as to say that if you're having something like an APS-C camera, f1.8 will do the trick too. Now, if we're talking about micro four thirds, they have different standards. They have something the equivalence of f1.7. Now, there are some f1.4 lenses, and if there is ever a camera that needs better low light performance, it would be the micro four thirds cameras. The problem, however, is that if you have something like f1.4, you're gonna have that wobbly effect and the difficulty to focus. And then I don't need to tell you that micro four thirds cameras already have tremendous problems focusing. So you don't want f1.4 for that. Now, I wanna talk about sharpness, and I made a video about this, or I will be, depending on what day it is of the week, a video about how I think that sharpness is basically overrated. But there's a lot of people that will say that if you have like an f1.4 lens, it's like super sharp. And I'll agree, but again, it's that focus area, it's just very narrow, right? So even if that thing is sharp, like 90% of the entire image is blurry, and maybe some people want that effect, and I respect that. Now, there are other people who say like, this is where you can clearly see that you're just an amateur. You don't know the capabilities of the f1.4 lenses. The f1.4 lenses are better because they get better corner sharpness and yada yada. Like, yes, if you're like pixel peeping and doing very advanced work, and if you're like a professional photographer, yes, maybe there are some slight benefits that, well, let's be honest, most software can actually fix today. But for most people, the general population, I would say like 80 or 90% of people who are playing around with these cameras, you don't need f1.4. And it's expensive. Like I've never had a situation where I'm shooting at f1.8 and I go like, if only I had an f1.4 lens here. Never happens. Even if I'm out doing astrophotography, I will sometimes use an f1.8 lens just to prove a point to myself that, yeah, that f1.4 is really pointless. Like, if you're doing astrophotography, you know, you can just increase the shutter speed. You know, you can tinker around with your settings, like the exposure time, you can play with that. Like, you do not need an f1.4 lens. I cannot stress that enough. You really do not need an f1.4 lens. Now, obviously, if you're a camera geek, you're the type of person that you have to find out for yourself. And you know, you have my blessing. Go ahead, play around with your f1.4, save your money, buy that f1.4 lens. But you're gonna find out, like, at first it's gonna be like the honeymoon suite, like, you know, you feel like, oh, this is amazing, I'm never gonna use anything other than f1.4, but then you're gonna sort of figure it out that no, f1.8 is really the hot spot. So yeah, f1.4 is for people who wanna brag, for people who don't know much about cameras, or for like really intense professionals. And I'm sorry to break it to you, but neither I or you, are professionals. Like, I sell stock photos, I sell stock videos, I make content on YouTube. In a way, yes, technically I'm a professional, right? But I'm not hired to get professional work done where you use the lens as a tool. It's just not gonna happen. Mostly the way we do it, like we're hobby professionals, we point and shoot. That's the way we operate. And so that was embarrassing. And so for my money's worth, F1.4 is overrated and F1.8 is the way to go. That's all I had for today. Take care. If you need me, I'll be in another video.